Yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, you were learning a little bit about the creation, about the creation of the heavens and the earth, and all the other things that were created on the first day. Very, very fascinating stuff. Obviously, everything that we learn in the Gemara is not only important for the superficial content, but also it has layers and layers and layers of meaning. And there are, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages that are, filled with commentaries upon commentaries about what all of this means, both in the literal sense and also in the esoteric sense. So, while we'll be learning Pshat, it's not limited to Pshat. There's a lot hidden over here. They say Pshat is also the letters for Tipesh, meaning to say that somebody who believes that what they see is all they get is a bit of a fool. One has to realize that there's so much hidden over here. And one of the things I do here is I learn with boys of the Masifta down at the yeshiva in South Beach. And, some of the boys get a little bit frustrated when they read the Gemara and they're like, what's this got to do with me? And one has to try to help them understand that this is the will and the wisdom of Hashem, and we're connecting to Hashem through learning His Torah. And although some of the things you're not going to put into practice immediately, like some of the Agadata, which talk about different remedies for nosebleeds and other things of that nature, nevertheless, this is very deep things, and it's the will and the wisdom of Hashem. And we have to realize that we are really re-experiencing Har Sinai again. We're really experiencing receiving the Torah again. That's why when we say the blessing of the Birchat Torah, we say Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you Hashem, Noisein HaTorah, the one who is giving the Torah, the giver of the Torah. And it's in the present tense that Hashem is right now giving the Torah, so that when we're learning, we're experiencing it anew. So let's bear that in mind when we learn the Gemara today. So my understanding from Rabbi Smith is that you're holding on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. It's halfway down the page in the broad lines, the middle broad lines, and you're holding by, let me just find it over here.
Verse 34 is what I have.
34?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well,
12A. I've got
to be 12A.
Yeah, it's 12A.
12A3.
12A3. Okay. Amar of Zutra. That's what
Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi, I don't know if you can see, but some people have their hands raised to ask questions.
Oh,
Robert
sorry.
was raising his hand, and then Ben.
I didn't see hands, but go right ahead, please.
Oh, no. One of the things I was concerned with was that.
I have my hand, and I don't know if somebody.
All right, go ahead, Ben.
Does.
I don't see your hand up, but go ahead.
Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, thanks. Part of what we've been dealing with has been some contradictions. Ben, you didn't get your iPad fixed yet. You're sort of cutting in and out. You want to begin? Ben, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll talk slowly, maybe. I don't know. I had a question because it said in the Gemara that Ruach merachefet al hamayim.
Yes.
In the first day that the wind was created and the water was created, and I'm saying I know that later on in a different day the water is being separated from the sky,
Right.
from the heavens.
Right.
If the water is not separated yet from the heavens, how does wind blow over it?
This is a very good question. It seems that there was a process in the creation of the world where, in essence, everything was, at least this is one opinion, everything was created on the first day. but things were only spread out and put into their right place and taking taking form and occupying the particular space that they were supposed to occupy. Each day different things were put into their place, and we're going to actually deal with that in the Gemara. The Gemara is actually the Gemara already dealt with it earlier on. There was a question about the light. The light wasn't on the first day or the fourth day, and it explained that it was created on the first day, but it was set in its right spot on the fourth day. The same is true with the water, as we're going to learn today. As we go through the Gemara, and it talks about the different attributes that Hashem used when creating the world, it's going to speak about what happened with the water, specifically what happened with the water, since the water kept on, taking up all this space. How did it eventually come to a division between the waters and everything else? And what we're going to find is that Hashem had to use his power of screaming, Goara, it's called, and through that he dried up the water, and that allowed for the land to have its place and everything else to be in the right place. But hopefully the Gemara will touch upon your question. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the other question I would have is, and maybe others will correct me, we had a number of readings relative to how many people can study together, whether it's 2 or 3. Again, the whole idea also, but then through history, there've always been at the academies classes where there's been teaching going on for generations. And how do we reconcile what they say? And it's contradictory in a lot of ways with some of the pashas that we have read.
So when it comes to the idea of not teaching to more than 2 or 3, it's not talking necessarily about the pshat of these issues. So, for example, when it talks about not studying the first chapter of Yecheskel, it's not referring to just reading Chumash, reading the Tanakh, that is, and translating it. It's talking about going deeper and teaching the esoteric meanings of these things, where when you go deeper and you start talking about subtle issues, one who's not paying attention could get the wrong idea, and things can go haywire as a result. I mean, the truth is our history is filled with people who started out okay, and they heard things and it confused them and they went off. We have, Antigonus Ishaichai, there were people, the whole 4 people walking into the Pardas, one of them went crazy, one of them became a heretic. Again, this is the idea of going into deep esoteric stuff and not being able to make sure that the person who you're teaching is having all their concerns addressed, so that
Rabbi,
they don't walk out confused. Yes.
You have to translate things like Peshat and Pardes.
Right. So pshat, so pshat is the simple contextual meaning of a word, and Pardes is actually an acronym. Although Pardes in Hebrew means an orchard, but Pardes is also an acronym for pshat, which is, as I said, the simple contextual meaning of the word. Remez is the things that are hinted to. Drush are the things that are more homiletic, and Soid are the esoteric parts of the Torah, the deeper hidden explanations of what lies beneath all of this. So when one is teaching in a broad audience, the Gemara was telling us you have to be careful not to go in too deep, because you're going to walk away with people misunderstanding what you're saying, getting the wrong end of the stick, and then possibly even teaching others their faulty way of understanding. So you have to be very careful. So in a sense, although you do find big academies learning things together, even, you have Bible classes, Tanakh classes, where you're teaching to a broad range of people. Nevertheless, they're not going into the deeper esoteric meanings. That would have to be done in private, one-on-one. And look, one knows themselves. How many times have you been understood, even when you're trying to say something simply? You're trying to be straightforward. You're trying to be as clear as you can, and somebody's still able to misunderstand and misconstrue what you're saying. So, certainly when it comes to things that are, bordering on idolatry, because when you start talking about things that speak about God in ways of, anthropomorphism, where you have, different descriptions of Hashem, and then somebody walk away believing that God has a body, you could run into big trouble. So those things should not be taught in a large audience, but they should only be taught one-on-one. Or, well, he says 2 or 3, depending what the issue is. So let's get into the Gemara, unless there are any other questions. Yes, go for it.
There's just one more. I'm
Yes.
sorry, but there are a lot
No
of
problem.
angling answers out there. One, we had the sessions relative to sexual relations in incest.
Yes.
One of the things that, if I remember correctly, if a man had relations with his daughter by his second wife, he was not then guilty of any indiscretions. Having sex. Am I correct? I mean, that's what we talked about, gentlemen. Anybody else had a different interpretation, or I'm off the mark for that?
Well, again, there are certain relationships that are forbidden even after you go about it in the right way. Meaning to say, if a person is not allowed to marry his sister, it doesn't just mean you're not allowed to have relations with her outside of wedlock. It means you're not even allowed to go to chuppah kiddushin and try to do everything right and then sleep with her, because she is what's called an erva. She's a forbidden, someone who's forbidden to you. And so when the Gemara says that one particular relationship is permitted, it doesn't mean that you can just take her from the street and rent a room. It means whether you're allowed to marry her or not.
No, this was the daughter of a wife who she had by a different husband and not him. And
Right.
He then had relations with her, but there was no sinning involved. It's the best way I could understand what the discussion was. And so he was essentially had relations with her while he was married to her mother, but there wasn't any, what's the word? There wasn't any, I don't know what the word is, but there wasn't any guilt.
right.
There wasn't any
relation to the
there wasn't any
daughter.
sinning relative to that relationship.
Right. So to be honest, I have to look at that Gemara. I dived in over here in the middle of the Gemara. I have to go back and look at that Gemara. But my guesstimate would be as follows, and you can take it or leave it. I'm happy to look into it and come back to you tomorrow with a better answer. But my guesstimate right now would be that back in the day, one was allowed to be married to more than one woman. Okay, you're allowed to be married to more than one woman. It's only since about 1,000 years ago that we cannot be married to more than one woman. And there are different ways to betroth a woman and for her to become your wife. There's kesef, shtar, and bia, money, and through a marriage document or through intercourse. That's how you can marry somebody. And so the question is, if this girl is now eligible to be married, and the husband of her mother chooses to want to be with her, whether that would be a violation of any of the biblical prohibitions in the Torah, which say that one, for example, should not be married to 2 sisters. So the fact that 2 people are related to each other can also prevent you from being able to have relations with the other one. So the question is whether this daughter from another woman, from another husband, is permitted to have relations with this man, or whether that in itself, the fact that they are somehow related through marriage, would that preclude her from being able to have relations with him? And the Gemara was saying that no, there's no lav that says that one cannot have relations with a girl who's born from another husband.
What's a
Does that make
lav?
sense? Right.
What's a
It's not
lav?
right. What's a lav? A lav is
It's
a negative prohibition from the Torah. So anytime the Torah says do not do this or that, that is considered a lav, and for violating that, one is liable to receive either lashes or sometimes a capital verdict where you put to death for desecrating Shabbos or the like, or for illicit relations, one is put to death. And the question is whether you violated that. Obviously, this is talking about when there was warning and the person still continued to do it despite knowing what the consequences would be. And then there was a cross-examination in a Beis Din and the person was put to death. And so that's that. Any other questions before we start? Going once, going twice. All right, let's start.
What's this? What was this cross-examination you just said?
So when any time somebody was accused of doing something that was in violation of a biblical law, something from the Torah, before one could give him the required punishment, one would have to cross-examine the witnesses to ensure that the warning was done properly and that what they are testifying to really occurred, and that they themselves are not eligible to serve as witnesses. Because if somebody is a relative, for example, they are not eligible to be to testify against somebody who's a close relative to them. If they are gamblers, for example, then they are not considered to be trustworthy witnesses. So they would have to examine all these things. And I guess the most important thing when it comes to testimony against somebody else is that it has to be falsifiable, which means to say, we want to know when this took place. You have to tell us a time and a date, because without giving us a time and a date, then we have no way to falsify what you're saying. There's no way to get two witnesses to say that you couldn't possibly have witnessed that because you were with us elsewhere at the same date in a different place. So that's called Edim Zemimim. There you have two witnesses who come and contradict the original witnesses and say you couldn't have possibly witnessed that because you were with us elsewhere. And in order for any testimony to be accepted in Beis Din, in order to give a punishment to somebody else, it has to be cross-examined by the Beis Din. And one of the most important things is the time and the place where they claim this took place. So that's the cross-examination that takes place when the Beis Din would hand out a punishment. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
Rabbi,
No,
Yes.
just like you were saying, cross-examination of the witnesses.
That's correct.
The first time you hadn't said the witnesses. I'm trying to imagine.
Right.
Thank you.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I missed in the beginning the introduction of what is your name?
My name is Eli Cohen.
Okay.
Eli
Where
Cohen.
are you? Where are you?
I'm now in North Miami Beach. As I said before, I started out my career as a rabbi in Sydney, Australia for 14 years. I spent 4 years in Toronto, and now I am here. All right. Let's start the Holy Gemara. Let's start the Holy Gemara. Omar Rav Zutra Bar Toivia Omar Rav. So we're going to now list 10 things that were really a part and parcel of how Hashem created the world, what he used to create the world. So Rav Zutra Bar Toivia said in the name of Rav, so this is a statement in the name of Rav, Ba'asara Dvarim Nivra Ha'olam. The world was created with 10 things. God used 10 things to create the world. What were these 10 things? And I'm going to list them now, but the Gemara is going to come and examine what these things are. B'chachma is with wisdom. B'tfuna is with understanding or with insight. Uvedas, and with knowledge. Okay, now this corresponds to what we know as the first 3 of the 10 spheros, where you have Chachma, Bina, and Das. Chabad is an acronym for Chachma, Bina, and Das. And we're saying that God used those faculties in order to create the world. The Gemara continues, Uve Koyach, he used strength, Uve Go'ara, and with screaming or rebuke, Uve Gvura, and with might. All of these things were used in the creation of the world. And we're going to see that. We'll see what that means. Betzedek, with righteousness, or b'mishpat, and with justice. Bechesed, with kindness. Over rachamim, and with compassion. So obviously when it's mentioning these 10 things, each one of these 10 things are in themselves important tools that Hashem used to create the world. And as the Gemara is prone to do, it's going to bring verses from the Torah to show that this is indeed the case. Because in the Gemara, the whole Talmud can basically be summarized in 2 words. The whole Talmud. Maybe not. In other words, everything that is stated in the Talmud is immediately challenged. Meaning, you want to say something, you're welcome to say something, but you need to back it up. You need to bring proof. So we've mentioned in the name of Rav 10 things that Hashem used to create the world. We right immediately now want to know, how do you know this? How do you know that God used these 10 things specifically to create the world? So the Gemara goes in and starts to bring verses for each of these 10 things. Well, b'chachma uv'svuna, we deal with the first 2 things first, with wisdom and with insight. Well, both of these things are actually explicitly mentioned in a verse. As it's written, Hashem b'chachma yosad aretz. Hashem founded the earth with wisdom. Shamayim bisvuna. He established the heavens with tavuna, with insight. Now, what about das? B'das, you said that he did it with understanding, with knowledge. So where does that said? As it's written in the very next verse, it says b'daitoi tohaimos nivku. Through his understanding, or with his understandings, the depths from them were the depths were from them, as it like it says Vayimona. No, excuse me. Right, but so okay, we're cleaved. I'm sorry, we're cleaved. Okay, so here we have a pasuk that mentions explicitly das, that it was used in the beginning of creation. Then the Gemara continues and says, what about bekoyach and gvura, with strength and with might? Dichsiv says in the pasuk, meichin harim bekoychai, that he prepares or he sets mountains with his strength, so that's koyach. Nezar bigvura, who is girded with might. So these attributes are mentioned as part of a description of how Hashem created the world. What about Ga'ara? And this is where it answers the question that you're asking about the water. What happened with the water? Well, we'll see in a minute. We're coming there. Sorry. The Ga'ara, with rebuke, as it is written, Amudei Shamayim, the pillars of the heavens, Yeroifafu, shudder, the Yismahu, and are astounded, Migarosai, by his rebuke. So we're talking about establishing the world, and when we talk about the pillars of the heavens, it talks about the reactions that they had to Hashem's rebuke, which means that God used this Ga'ara, this rebuke, at the beginning of creation. What about Betzedek or Mishpat, with righteousness and justice? So this, we have a clear verse. It says in the pasuk, Tzedek or Mishpat mechoin kisecha, righteousness and justice are your throne's foundation. So this is also something that describes Hashem, and in the context of the creation of the world, it seems that it's important for the pasuk to tell us that it was God's righteousness and justice that are the foundation of his throne. Okay, Rabbi, what about Chesed and Rachmim? The Chesed of Rach, yes.
Yeah, they're quoting here things from Tehillim and from Eov, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't they quoting things from the Chamisha Chumshei Torah?
It's a very good question. That's a very good question. And so here's the thing: when it comes to the Chamishei Chumshei Torah, everything in the Chamishei Chumshei Torah is precise and specific, and also very shorthand. What does it mean, shorthand? It means that there is so much that is just alluded to, right? by inferences. Here, what we're trying to do is to find an actual verse that gives me an explicit reference to these things. And because the explicit reference to the 10 things that are mentioned by Rav are not found in the Chumshei Torah, we have to go to elsewhere in Tanakh to find them. Does that make sense? In other words, they want to have something that's clear, that's indisputable, that these were explicitly referenced in the Tanakh. And because we can't find it in the first chapters of Bereshis, therefore we have to go and find it elsewhere. In other words, when we talk about the whole creation of heaven and earth, it takes up what, 31 verses? That's it. That's the whole thing. We're talking about the whole universe and everything in between, right? Is being described in just very few verses. Obviously, it's not the full story. The full story is spread over the whole Tanakh, and obviously also in Torah Shebaal Peh. So that's the long answer. The short answer is because there aren't psukim that they can call upon from the Chumshei Torah. That's the short answer. If there were, they would. In fact, you find elsewhere in the Gemara that sometimes when a Tana or an Amira will quote from a verse from somewhere in the Tanakh, and there's something similar that's found in the pasuk, they will in the Chumshei Torah, they'll be asked, why are you bringing from here? You could bring from there. And there's obviously always a reason why they chose to choose a pasuk from Tanakh rather than Chumshei Torah, which is explained there in the Gemara. Yeah, is that okay?
Thank you.
Okay. So now, what about Chesed and Rachmim? Chesed of Rachmim says the Chesiv. It says, Hashem, remember your compassion, Hashem, and your kindness, ki me'olam hema, because they are from time immemorial. In other words, from the beginning of creation. So therefore, these things, the Chesed and the Rachamim, were already there when Hashem created the world, and those were things that were used for the creation. Now, here we come to another statement with regards to the creation that's going to be talking about. We said the Ge'ara, the rebuke that Hashem used for the beginning of creation. And here's the statement. Ma'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, B'shah HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'shah Shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu es ha'olam. When Hashem created the world, the world started to expand. It was expanding continuously. Like two unraveling balls of the material that's used in for, you know, where you have the warp and the loom. So these big balls of this kind of string, right? When you throw them out, they can, you know, continuously unravel. So they're using that as an image for what was happening when Hashem was creating the world, that the world kept on expanding and expanding and expanding. So until Hashem screamed at it, rebuked it, and that brought it to a standstill. That caused it to stop expanding. Where do we know this from? Shenema uses the pasuk as it says in the verse, the pillars of the heaven shudder, and are astounded by his rebuke. This was the pasuk we just used before as a proof that God used Ge'ara, but we didn't explain exactly what the function of the Ge'ara was. We explained that it was used, but what was the purpose? So we had this statement now from Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Rav, that the function of this Ge'ara, this rebuke, was to stop the world from continually expanding. Now, a similar statement was made by Reish Lakish, V'hainu, says the Gemara, V'hainu. The Amar Reish Lakish, yes?
Why God started the entire process.
Mm-hmm.
It's his process to start.
Mm-hmm.
So why does he have to yell or rebuke a process that he started?
That's an excellent question, and I thought of that question too. I didn't get a chance to look up answers, but I'm going to rely on my memory a little bit. But I'm happy to go and look it up actually in the books. My understanding of that is as follows: everything that Hashem created, he created for a purpose. And as there's an expression in the Tanakh, Masha haya hu sheyeh, that which was is what will be, means that everything that took place in the creation of the world is something that is repeated over and over and over again, which means to say that there's a particular purpose in doing things a certain way, because there's a benefit that can only be gained in that manner. So, for example, it says when Hashem wanted to create the world, he wanted to create it with midas hadin, with the attribute of judgment. But then he saw that the world would not be able to endure with just judgment alone. So it says, Shitav imay midas harachman. He then partnered with it the attribute of mercy, right? In order to be able to have the world endure. The same question can be asked. Well, why didn't just God do it with the right measure to begin with? And obviously there was a reason why it had to start out that way and then be counterbalanced with something else, because there's something to be gained through that particular process. And we see in the world and in our experience that sometimes in order for something to be able to grow, it needs to meet obstacles. It can't just go smooth. It has to first start in a certain way and then change it in a different way. I mean, you have the same question with yesterday's Gemara, where it says that God created this light. And this light he saw was not good for the wicked. So he went and he hid it. Well, what was the point of that? Why do it that way? Why not see ahead of time what's going to happen and just do it right the first time? And there are many answers to it, but one of the answers is that it wasn't a mistake. That light was needed for the tzaddikim who will either use it lasid Levi, or as others explain, meaning in the future, others explain that God took this light and he hid it in the Torah. And there are people today who are able to use the light of the Torah to illuminate them, to have their lives illuminated, for them to be able to see through the light of Torah. Likewise over here, the fact that Hashem did it in this particular way means that there was a particular advantage of the world going and continually growing and growing, and for him to have to rebuke it, to stop it, to be able to achieve a desired result. Why exactly? That I have to look a little bit further into, and Bli Neder, tomorrow I'll try to come back with a more fleshed out answer. But yes.
So my problem is with the word rebuke. Okay. I mean, Hashem could have started the process, and then he could have said, okay, until now, stop. I mean, just like he created everything else by using words. Why the term rebuke? Rebuke is a negative aspect.
Right. So
I would guess because it's the opposite. You're making it do the opposite of what it wanted. It's stopping it. It's a poetic word for stopping. So it's growing, and then he's stopping it from growing so much. That's all.
So he could have said, stop. He didn't have to say rebuke. If you're saying it's poetic, then what? Am I going to take from this that the Chumash is nothing more than a poetic statement of what was going on? I mean,
no,
we know that that's not the case.
It's telling you, Mamish, it's growing, and it's saying stop growing. The rebuke is the reversal of the process.
No, the term rebuke has a very negative connotation.
Right.
To say stop, that's not a negative connotation. That's telling a process you're done.
Right. Someone has a hand up. Yes. I see. I'm not sure.
Ben, go ahead.
Yeah,
I wanted to say, to me, my understanding is that in the first day, two things were created. Heaven and earth. Heaven is water, and the earth is the dirt. And all the other 8 things that are listed as 10 things that was created were just a description of what these things looked physically, as they were created. They're describing the heaven and earth. So the Geara is only to those 2 things that were created actually, the heaven and the earth, because he stops the water and he stops the earth from growing without stopping. So apparently they were supposed to stop at some point, they didn't, so he gave the Geara to stop. Only to those 2 things, not to the things that describe them.
So I hear what you're saying. I'll just share something that's explained in Kabbalah, that when we say every day in davening, L'cha Hashem hagdula v'hagevura, so the Kabbalah explains that gedula, right. So, but the gedula, that refers to chesed, and gedula refers to ma'aseh bereshis. So chesed is kindness, and ma'aseh bereshis means the creation of the world. So what's the connection between chesed, kindness, and gedula, greatness, and ma'aseh bereshis, which are all symbolized in one word, gedula? It's the idea that when it came to ma'aseh bereshis, when it came to the creation of the world, there was chesed. What is chesed? Kindness. Chesed is hispashtus. And we're talking about the kind of hispashtus, which means spreading out, which has no end. Chesed that has no end, although you think it's a good thing, it means somebody who's kind without limit, kind without discernment, kind just notwithstanding any of the other things that should otherwise be taken into consideration, although it looks like a good thing, right? Ultimately can be a disastrous thing. That's why after Gedula had to come Gevura. Gevura refers to the symptom where there was a contraction, a need to hold back and withhold. And just like unlimited and unbridled kindness is a very powerful thing, it would take something as powerful to cause it to hold back. And that's why perhaps there needed to be this Geara, because asking it to stop or saying stop is not enough to contain that unlimited kindness, unlimited spreading. It had to be something more forceful, like Gevura, right? Like this idea of discipline, and which is being alluded to in the word Geara. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. Yes,
Rabbi Cohen, I could understand that if you, as a person, as a man, who has a very limited in the sense of your understanding what I mean by limited.
Yes.
But here we're saying it's Hashem who said this.
Right. So look, the only redeeming answer will be when I can explain to you the positive contribution that Geara would make. So I have to get back to you with that. I have to find how it's not a negative thing, it's actually a positive thing that God used Geara, although he didn't have to, because, for example, we say that the whole world was brought into creation by Hashem's speech, right? Ba'asar ma'amaros nivra ha'olam. So, all God needs to do is stop speaking and it stops existing. So since God is all powerful and can do anything, so therefore, why did it have to be Geara? It could have been in a less startling way. It could have been in a way of just stopping. So therefore, what needs to be explored is what is the compelling reason to use Geara when we're speaking about Hashem. I understand the question. I have to come up with I have to find a source that comes up with a really good answer to your question. All right.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I think an answer to Ezra's question, excuse me,
Mhm.
might be that the word rebuke is for the purpose of us learning a lesson that Hashem can do it the way he does it. But why rebuke? It's for the people that are learning Torah to learn a lesson from that word.
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that, because I think it's the Iyun Yaakov uses that answer exactly when it comes to why Hashem hid the light, because he asks this question of why did God first invest in this light and then hide it? And he says, well, this is God teaching us a lesson that even though you're invested in something, sometimes you have to go off the script and you have to change. Don't be, just because you're committed to a mistake that you've been making for 40 years, it doesn't mean you have to keep going with it, right? You can change courses as God shows us an example at the beginning of creation. So the Iyun Yaakov says that answer with regards to the light. And possibly you can apply it here to that it's a lesson for us. That the story of Ma'aseh Bereshis is relating it for us to learn lessons in our own life. Possibly.
But Rabbi,
Yes.
my response to David is very simple, because we're always told, yeah, you find something wrong, you rebuke an individual, but if you rebuke him the wrong way, you may lose that individual.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be very careful on how the word rebuke is used, especially if it's supposed to be a lesson to us.
Right.
So that's why I still ask the question, why use this term?
Right. Which is fair enough. And I will, God willing, look into it after the class and hopefully come back with an answer. All right.
Thank you.
No problem. So the Gemara continues, V'hainu do Amar Rish Lakish, and this is what Rish Lakish says, Mai tichsiv ani kel shakai. What is the meaning? When the pasuk says that Hashem said, I am kel shakai, what is it? What's the meaning of this name? He says, Ani hu, I am the one, she'amarti la'olam, who said to the world, die, enough. So the shin of she'amarti and the die at the end is really putting the two things together. She'amarti la'olam midai, that's the shin daled yud name of Hashem. Amar Rish Lakish. So Rish Lakish says another similar statement, referring back to the creation of the world. This is coming back to the question before, that when Hashem created the ocean, is it was expanding continuously at Shegoar boy HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'Yavshay, until Hashem screamed at it or rebuked it and it dried up. And that's when the water took its place and remained in its boundaries, and the dry land had its boundaries. Shenema, like it says in the verse, Goyer bayam vayabshehu v'chol hanahoros hechriv, that he rebukes the sea and makes it dry, and he makes all the rivers parched. So we see that through this attribute of Gara, which is being translated as rebuke, I'm not 100% sure whether rebuke is necessarily the best translation of goyer, because goyer is really to scream at something, right? To raise one's voice and scream. Whether it's rebuke. Technically, you can also use the word rebuke, but I'm not sure it's an accurate description of the word goyer. Because if you look at the pasuk that we used before, right, it says that the world was astounded. The pillars of the heaven were astounded. They were shocked, right? They started to shake as a result of this screaming. So it wasn't just a rebuke. It was, God expressing a use of force, right, that came out in a Ga'ara, and that put it back into its place. Anyway, I definitely we'll look more into this. But we're moving now on to a different discussion, still connected to the creation of the heaven and the earth, but not so much as to how Hashem created the world, meaning which attributes he used it, but the chronology of it. In which way did Hashem create the world? What came first? So Tana Rabbanon, it was taught in a brisa. It says as follows: B'Shamai says, Shamayim nivru tchila, the heavens were created first. V'achakach nivreis haaretz, and only after that the earth was created. So first you have the heaven, and then you have the earth. Shenema, and he brings a verse to support his claim. Shenema, as it says in the pasuk, Bereshis, in the beginning, Bara Elikim, Hashem created Eis HaShamayim, the heavens, Eis Haaretz, and the earth. So we have first the heaven and then the earth. So since the heavens are mentioned first, so that's how we know that they were created first. Beis Hillel, Imrim, and Beis Hillel say they disagree. They say no. Eretz Nivreis Tchila, it's actually the earth that was created first. The Achakach Shamayim, and only afterwards the heavens. How do I know this? Because if you look further on in Chumash, it says, Shenem, as it says in the pasuk, B'Yom Asois Hashem, on the day that Hashem made, Hashem Elikim, on the day that Hashem Elikim made Eretz Shamayim, the earth and the heaven. So here we see that the heaven was mentioned first, and only then the earth was mentioned first, and only then the heavens. So that's a proof for Beis Hillel that if you want to know which one was created first, it was the earth and then the heaven. So now Beis Shammai doesn't take that line down. First it's actually Beis Hillel challenged Beis Shammai. Amru lehem Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel turned around and said to Beis Shammai, L'divreichem, according to your opinion, you're saying that what? That first the heaven was created and then the earth was created, but that doesn't make sense. Logically, it shouldn't be that way. And they give an example. Adam boine aliyah v'achakach boine bayis. Does a person first make a second floor and then build the rest of the house underneath it? That doesn't make sense. That's not the way you do something. First, you build the first floor, meaning the ground floor, and then you build the second story. How do we know that we should consider the earth, the heavens, as a second story? Right? Shenema, he brings a pasuk. It says, "Haboine bashamayim maloisav v'agudosai al eretz yisada." That it says that Hashem built his upper level in the heaven and founded his group, right? Meaning all the things that were created upon the earth. So we see that this pasuk is comparing the heavens to the second floor. So now what you'll notice with the answer that comes back from Beis Shammai is that Beis Shammai doesn't answer the question. It's a bit like the Jewish principle of answering a question with a question. He says, Beis Shammai turns around to Beis Hillel and he says, you're asking a question to me on my opinion. What about your opinion? According to your opinion, what you're suggesting is, and here he goes straight to the analogy, a person is going to first make a footstool and then only afterwards make the chair. Where's he getting this imagery of a footstool and a chair? Well, this comes from the Haftarah that we read on Rosh Chodesh, on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Like it says, Ko Yamar Hashem. This is what Hashem says. Hashemayim kisi. The heavens are my chair. V'haaretz, and the earth hadayim raglai, are my footstool. So therefore, does it make sense to first make the footstool, which would be the earth, and then to make the heavens, which is the chair? Doesn't make sense. So both of them have a rationale for holding their opinion, but it doesn't seem that either one of them respond to the question that the other is posing to them, right? They're just coming back with a smart argument against the other opinion, but not really supporting their own opinion, meaning not responding directly to the question that they were just asked. Okay. Now, we've got two opinions. We've got Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, right? Beis Shammai says it's the heavens first. And Beis Hillel says it was the earth first. But now we have a third opinion. The Chachamim say, not like you and not like you, right? It's like the story with the rabbi, he's right and she's right and you're also right. So Adar says what Shenema, he says, sorry, so what the Chacham say? They were actually created simultaneously. They were actually created as one. What is the proof? What is the proof? Shenema, as it says in the pasuk, Af Yodi Yosta Eretz. Also, my hand has laid the foundation of the earth. V'yamini Tovcha Shamayim, and my right hand has measured out the heavens. Kairani Aleihem Yamdu Yachad. And he finishes off and says that I call to them and they stand together. And this seems to imply, right, that they were really created as one. Sorry, I missed something. Yes? Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. So, Frank the Gemara, 1 second. V'idach Mayachtov, according to Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, who do not believe that they were created together, but they say that one was created for the other. So then what does this word Yachtov mean? Meaning the rabbis seem to have a very good support to say that it was done together. So how can Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel disagree with the rabbis? Seems to be very compelling. So, and for the Gemara, it means not that they were created together, but rather it means that they'll not slip away from each other. In other words, that they become integrated as one whole, as one world, right? But it's not really this, when it says a yachtov, it's not talking about when they were created. It's rather that now that they are created, they should be together. They shouldn't slip away from each other. Frag the Gemara, 1 second. The whole opinion of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is not a problem of just having two Tanoim arguing with each other. It's a problem with having two Sukkim arguing with each other. It's one thing to say, I have one opinion, you have another opinion. It's another thing entirely to have two verses which seem to be actually arguing with each other. That's a problem, right? Frank, that's the Gemara's question. Kashu kroi adodi. The verses themselves are a contradiction with one another. The pasuk that you brought down from the beginning, seems to indicate, like Beis Shammai, the pasuk that Beis Hillel brought is also in Chumash, which seems to indicate the other way around. So it seems to be contradicting each other. So the Gemara comes up with a very interesting answer. The answer says as follows. Omer Rish Lakish says, it's very simple. There's no problem at all. There's no contradiction. Why? That's simple. Because here's what happened. When they were created, meaning the heavens and earth, you know what happened? Bara Shamayim. First he created the heaven. And then Hashem created the earth. Now that they're created, we have to put them in their place. Each one has to get his place. So, Okshanota, Nota Haaretz, when Hashem started to take them and put them in his place, he first set the earth into place. And then only afterwards, he set the heavens in their place. And that's how you resolve the contradiction. So simply put, you're right, and you're also right. It's just a matter of which part of the process of creation you're referring to. When you're referring to the actual creation, Beis Shammai is right. The creation of the heavens was before the creation of the earth. And when it comes to when they were actually set into their place, Beis Hillel was right. That really, it's a matter of first putting the earth in its place and then afterwards the heaven in its place. Now, some of the Mefarshim ask, Lamai nafkamina, if there was ever a question of what's the difference, Lamai nafkamina means what's the difference, who cares? My dahava hava. Whatever happened, happened. What practical lessons and implications are there whether God created the heaven first or the earth first? We're here, right? We're here. There's a heaven, there's the earth. Why do I care which one comes first? And so there are different explanations. One of the explanations is that this is a matter of what's more important? Is ruchnius, is spirituality more important? And should that come first? Or is Gashmius more important? And should that come first? And these have practical implications, because the question is as follows. What should one do? Should one go and first establish themselves, get married, build a house, and only once you are financially secure and stable, then you should go and sit and learn? Or should you go and sit and learn first? And then only after spending many years learning, should you go and... So it really depends. What's your opinion? Is your opinion that the heaven comes first and then the earth, meaning the going and learning is first and then afterwards the earth? Or is it the other way around? And obviously, that's just one explanation, but I'm sure people can, come up with many more as to what these things could actually symbolize and refer to. So far, so good? Okay. So now the Gemara says we've been talking about Shamayim, but what is Shamayim? What is Shamayim? Frank the Gemara, my Shamayim. What is this word Shamayim? So Amar Rabbi Yosi Bar Chanina. Rabbi Yosi Bar Chanina says it really means that it's etymologically it's these two words being put together, Sham Mayim, that it's a place where there's water. That there is water. That's what Shamayim means. That's where there's water. Another answer says b'masnisa tana, in the Baraisa, it was actually taught not that that's where there was the water, but rather it's a putting together of eish umayim, fire and water. What is it coming to teach us when it says Bereshis bara lekim es hashamayim v'esar? It's the heavens. Shamayim, which we're saying now, is not just that there's water, but rather that there's Shamayim. That's coming to tell us something specific. Melamed is teaching us Shehviyon Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem brought them utrafam zeh b'zeh, and he mixed them together. V'asa mehen rakia, and from these two things, from Eish Umayim, that's how Hashem created the heavens or the firmament. How did he do it? He took these two elements of water and fire, he put them together, and as a result, that's how he created the firmament in the heavens. Now, the next shtickle Gemara it goes into a whole long, well, not that long, but goes into a whole drasha about which means learning out from every single word in the verse, and we're trying to figure out what the word S is repeated for. The word S is usually used as a pointer, which means to say, when I say Es Hashamayim, you don't translate the word S. It just points to the heaven. The Es Haaretz would be and the S is not really used, but rather as a pointer, meaning telling us we're talking about the earth. The question is, why do we need those two? We'll leave that for tomorrow. So are there any questions before we wrap up, or any comments before we wrap up?